Hi, Stuart Talley here. We're doing another update on the ongoing Pinnacle metal-on-metal trial that's currently pending in Dallas, Texas on behalf of 5 plaintiffs that are suing DePuy for problems they had with their metal-on-metal Pinnacle hips. We are now more than 30 days into the trial, actual 30 trial days, more than 9 weeks of testimony this jury has heard at this point in the case. We're fully into the defense case. The defense are putting on witnesses to try and argue that the problems with the plaintiff's hips were not the result of the Pinnacle metal-on-metal design of the hip that they received. They've called lots of expert witnesses, and today I want to talk about the testimony of one of those witnesses, Dr. Brian Haas. He is an orthopedic surgeon that was involved in helping design the metal-on-metal Pinnacle. He testified primarily about the evolution of metal-on-metal, why they went to metal-on-metal, and his goal really was to sort of downplay the problems that the plaintiffs had by showing that metal-on-plastic hips can also cause problems when the plastic deteriorates. The problem with the argument is that the kinds of problems that you have with plastic are a lot different than the kinds of problems you have with metal debris. The reaction to metal debris is much more significant. Also, how often it happens is different. With the metal-on-metal hips, you have a much higher failure rate than you do with the metal-on-plastic hips. On cross-examination, the plaintiff's attorneys went to great lengths to really impeach the Dr. Haas's credibility, and what they really did was they focused on his relationship with DePuy over the years. And the evidence that came out on cross-examination was pretty shocking, is a good way to put it. On direct examination, Dr. Haas testified that he had received $5 million in royalty and compensation from DePuy over the years. On cross-examination, it turned out that the number really wasn't $5 million. It was much more than that, somewhere between $7.5 and $10 million that he received. What was also sort of shocking about the arrangement the doctor had with DePuy was how his consulting arrangement was set up. So there was testimony showing that he would work on what's called a design team. So there were several prominent surgeons that were called in from around the United States. They would meet at a resort, usually somewhere, and they'd have a meeting to talk about new designs for hips. And they were called the design team. And all of these surgeons had consulting agreements, and the consulting agreements did 2 things. First, it allowed them to get paid for their time showing up at these meetings. And also, the consulting agreements actually required the surgeons to use DePuy products exclusively in their practice, which was unusual, and it is actually the kind of arrangement that the federal government and European authorities fined DePuy for. They considered those consulting agreements to be kickbacks to the doctors. So what's interesting about the way this was set up is the doctor would show up at these design meetings and get paid an hourly fee, lots of money, but not huge money. Then he would give his ideas on new hip designs, as would the other surgeons. Then what was shown at trial was after the DePuy Pinnacle metal-on-metal hip had been patented, approved by the FDA, and actually launched, they were selling it. For some reason, DePuy enters a royalty agreement with the surgeon, Dr. Haas, where he gets a percentage of all hips that are sold in the United States. The implication that was made is that this consulting agreement was completely unnecessary. It really wasn't an agreement to compensate the doctor for the work he did previously, because he had already been compensated for that. What it really was an agreement to get him to go out and promote the hip, to sell it to other doctors and tell other doctors it was a great thing. And the compensation for him would be a percentage of all the sales. And so that was the arrangement that they spent a lot of time talking about, why this arrangement was put in place. And the implication was that it was put in place because they wanted a prominent doctor to sell the hip without anybody knowing he was being paid for that. The other thing that came out is Dr. Haas has two partners who also have similar arrangements with DePuy. One partner made $30 million doing this. The other partner made $20 million over the years doing this, these kinds of consulting arrangements. Another piece of evidence that came out involved a letter that Dr. Haas wrote. And it's a letter that he wrote to the CEO of DePuy right after there was a meeting of one of these design teams. And the letter basically discusses a meeting that the design team had before the Pinnacle was launched. And it said something along the lines of, you know, surgeons on the design team had some concerns about metal ions and the health impact that they might have on patients. And it said something like, we could do studies on this at my lab. And here's what the important part of the letter said was, the doctor was suggesting to DePuy CEO that if they funded the study in a certain way, through what's called an unrestricted grant, the lab could report the results of the study without mentioning that DePuy was involved. And that's specifically what the letter said. The letter said, if you give us an unrestricted grant, we can do this study without tying it at all to DePuy. So there was a lot of discussion about that, why he sent that letter, whether it was ethical to even suggest that to the CEO of DePuy, and there was a lot of stuff out there. The other sort of line of questioning that was very effective, I thought, on cross-examination had to do with doctors weighing the risk and benefits, especially this doctor in his practice. Because remember, this doctor was paid to only use DePuy products. He was receiving a royalty interest on all the hips that were sold. He never told this to any of his patients. He'd tell his patients he had a relationship with DePuy. That's it. He wouldn't tell them that he was required to use their products, that he made millions of dollars from this company. And that was another effort to attack his credibility. There was also discussion about the risk and benefits of these products and how the risk that something goes wrong was entirely on the patient. If something went wrong, they took all the risk. But the benefits all went to DePuy and went to the doctors. And the benefits are, if one of these hips has to be revised, DePuy gets to sell another hip. The doctor gets paid for doing another surgery. And so all the benefits go to DePuy, all the risk goes to the patient. And I think that was a theme that was hit very hard in the cross-examination of Dr. Haas. You know, this is one of these cases where when you see sort of what happens behind the scenes, behind the cloak in these medical device companies, you can see, and we've seen this in other cases, you see this situation where sales, market share are really the driving force behind a lot of the decisions that are made by these companies. You know, one of the things that came out early in the case is that metal on plastic hips worked fine for years, and there was absolutely no reason to come out with a metal on metal hip other than market share. A lot of this has been compared to Apple or electronic companies coming out with a brand new iPhone or a new product every year to keep market share, to keep people buying their product. And that's the model that's been shifted over to medical devices. And so, you know, today I think was a pretty good day for the plaintiffs. I think they did a pretty good job of really hitting the credibility of the defense expert very, very hard. So stay tuned. If you have any questions, you can call us at the number on the screen. You could fill out our online form, and myself or one of our lawyers will get back to you right away.